Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Dean Lloyd here again for Lloyd Consulting, episode 17 of Just Conversations. And as always, my next guest needs no introduction. Over to you, Shelley.
Thanks, Dean, and thanks so much for having me on this podcast or YouTube channel. I'm Shelly Turner, and how do I describe myself? I'm a qualified social worker, but for many years I've worked in jobs and things that don't have the word social work in them. They're not identified as such. So really, I probably identify as a youth justice worker for many years. And I was an academic sort of teaching in the social work and criminology spaces. So kind of at that intersection of social work and criminology is probably the right place to put me. And yeah, I'm a parent as well and many other identities, but yeah, at this point in time, just in your hands.
Thanks, Shelley. I think that's where we first connected. It was at a conference, I think. And
Yeah,
then I believe you were the first to invite me to participate with your social work students.
that's right. Yeah.
And it's been a common theme ongoing. I have guest lectured at a few other universities now, which you started that ball rolling, so thank you. But
Oh, that's good.
the education of third year criminology students seems to be where I sit with my but people wanting me to come in and teach these third years how the reality of the world might be.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, thank you for that's why I wanted to get you on, really, because I feel like you've invited me into an academic world as a person with lived experience. So I really wanted to thank you for that. And as well as, we've had several conversations around social work and paid placements.
Yes.
This is a bit topical at the moment.
Yeah,
So
it is.
what are your thoughts on that? That they're starting to pay people to do these placements,
Yes.
and yeah, where do you sit with that at the moment? And
Yeah, it's a good question, and it is topical now. And it's a good thing that it finally is, because it's something, I guess. Let me just think. I'm trying to think. It's probably more than 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago now, that I started working as the director of field education for social work at Vic Uni. And Victoria University, as you probably know, is a university that their slogan at the time was "We see you as more than your ATAR." And so it really, brings in people from all walks of life to Vic Uni, which was one of the things I really loved about working there, is the diversity of the student group. And what I noticed when I was working there and running field education is that there were a number of women in particular who, by the time they got to their second placement, and just to give you some context, the placements are 1,000 hours, which equates to about 3 months full time each for the final 2 years of your degree. And the degree at Vic Uni was Bachelor of Social Work, so that's 4 years. So it's a long time in anyone's book to be studying. And then, so in the midst of all your study, you also have those 2 really lengthy unpaid placements. And I found that for a number of women in the program, particularly those who came from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, they just couldn't afford it. They could not afford to go on placement for 3 months because they were working. And a lot of them also, of course, were caregivers, had children, so they had dependents. They sometimes had parents as well who were aging that they had to take care of. And they'd drop out, and they'd either drop out altogether, or they might sort of move into a welfare degree or something similar. And that's not to say that's not worthwhile. It's definitely worthwhile. But what it does do down the track, it creates a sort of glass ceiling. There's only so far you can go in terms of your income. So I just thought that was a really crap deal, really, because I think social work is meant to be about social justice, and I thought, well, how come we've got this structure still the same as when I'd studied, and I'd done it years ago. And I thought this is a bit of an old school apprentice model, really, for doing social work. Anyway, it got me thinking and got me looking around, and I started to notice that it was really mostly the degrees that were in the sort of caring professions that had this model. So nursing is another example, midwifery, and they were also very heavily dominated by women in the programs. And when I look at male-dominated programs like engineering, maybe law, I don't know, maybe law is not so male dominated anymore, but say engineering and sort of other industry kind of degrees, those ones seem to be more male dominated, and those were paid placements or paid kind of internship models. And I thought, well, there's a real disparity. So I applied with a colleague for a research grant from the Feminist Research Network, it was called, at Vic Uni. It was only a tiny amount of money, about $3,000, I think, or $6,000 maybe. And
Volunteer.
what's that?
Volunteer.
Kind of.
I'm
Well, I
sure,
just wanted to look
I'm
into, I
being
wanted to find
facetious.
out. Yeah, well, I wanted to see if it was right, whether this was a problem for the women in the program, or maybe it was just something I was seeing and it wasn't really a problem. Anyway, we did a little study, and basically it was overwhelming. You know, we really showed that students were living in poverty, really, and it wasn't just limited to women. Of course, there were young men or older men in the program as well who were struggling, but by and large, the issue of student poverty was just seemed to be increasing. And then we started looking around more broadly and saw other academics in other parts of Australia, particularly Queensland, had done some research as well and shown that, you know, students in these degrees were on the poverty line, trying to get themselves through the social work program. And the other cohort in that was really struggling were international students, because they're, you know, only allowed to work a certain number of hours a week. And then they're trying to do an unpaid placement on top of that as well. And very often, you know, they've saved up heaps of money to get here in the first place. And then and I guess the question is why? Why did it need to be fully unpaid? And I want to just add that one placement can potentially be paid if you're already working in the field.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of caveats around that and how that works.
It's quite onerous. I have a friend that's sort of in that process at the moment and had been working in a job doing great work for a long time and really struggled to get that placement. And the people were like, we're just going to pay you. We're just going to pay you. Don't worry about it. And the other thing I think that drew me to connect with you more was, so I considered doing a social work degree. However, I can't register as a social worker because of my record.
Yes.
So, and that's what this friend has, the friend that I'm talking about at the moment. So, you know, she's probably one of the better social workers I've met, or she lived experience. You know, I don't want to discriminate against anyone. Anyone can be a really good social worker. That's not the thing. However, the work that she's doing is exceptional, but she can't register as a social worker and earn the same, like this at the same capacity, because you can get a Medicare number, I believe, if you're a proper registered social worker. Yes, at some level.
Well, there's a couple of things in that. So first thing is that social workers are not registered. So social workers are accredited in Australia, and there's a bit different. No, it actually matters though, because the registration is mostly for health professionals through AHPRA, so the Allied Health Professionals, and for social work, it's accreditation through the Australian Association of Social Workers. So that's the body that has in their constitution a criteria that says you can't have a criminal record and be accredited as a social worker. But my understanding is that's been changed recently and been overturned.
Australia-wide or?
Yeah, Australia-wide, because it's a national body. Yeah, and I think but that's in response to a big campaign that was there, and you know, some of the women who, well, it was a lot of women actually, I think, with lived experience and criminal history who came out and really strong. And I must say, I didn't know that. Yeah, that's right. So, and I remember seeing quite a bit of it on Twitter at a time there, or what is it, X now? Yeah, and that was it. So it's good. It's now, I believe, no longer part of the Constitution. However, the bit you're talking about with Medicare, so that's another process outside of that's actually not to do with the Australian Association of Social Workers. That's, my understanding, is the federal government, and that's to be an accredited mental health social worker.
Yeah,
right. That's a different process. So you might be right. There might still be limitations there if you've got a criminal record. I don't know though, actually. It's worth looking into.
Yeah. You know, do your own research, please, people.
Yes.
So it's not gospel. You know, we're having a conversation. So just the other thing that I'd like to talk about is the value of difference. you know, where you work and what you do sort of currently, if you're allowed to disclose and share that, that's up to you. But
Yeah.
just how I see difference in that and how we can remain connected in the difference. You know, I don't believe in, you know, I'm an abolitionist somewhat. I'm an obsoletist, but that's a whole other story.
Yeah.
So yeah, just can you provide me or talk to the value of difference and how that, you know, we can still remain connected and have a difference of opinion?
Yeah, well, you'll have to chime in because we can only stay connected if you do as well. So,
True.
and I suppose well, I think because I think I'm a strong believer in conversations and in, I guess, getting to a point of reconciliation where you can, you know, as much as you can, and trying to build on the commonalities and not the differences, I guess.
Yeah.
And I see us as tackling much the same problem, but from a different end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And I remember years ago listening to a podcast, a social work one actually, that talked about covert activism. And that was about, you know, working in neoliberal government environments, but being an activist under the covers a bit and driving change in a different way. And
Yeah.
look, I totally accept that there's lots of criticisms of that, and there'll be people who'll say, well, no, you can't work for those organizations and not be part of the problem. And that's a fair point. You can make that point. But then I think you can also say, but it's much safer to be outside of the area, like, and we're talking about criminal justice and working
Yeah.
for
Yes.
forensic organizations, right? So I'll just put that on the table.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you
Thank
know,
you.
for years I've worked in youth justice, and for years I'm working in forensic mental health, which is adults and kids. And so this is people who come through the criminal justice system, but have been found either not guilty by way of mental impairment, or we've also got services in the prisons as well. So, you know, that's where I'm working now to put that on the table. And I guess the other side of the spectrum is that you could go and be more of an open activist outside of the system and advocate for change. And I've kind of done that too, because working in academic settings was a bit that way. But I also found that sometimes then you just didn't really know what was happening on the ground to the
Yeah,
same
true.
extent. And it's a lot safer to do it out there than it is to do it here, you know? And I think there's just two ways to skin that cat, I suppose. I don't know. I don't have an answer. And I
Yeah.
think, but I don't want to spend time arguing with people who I see as allies anyway,
Yeah.
right? I
Totally.
feel we're allies.
Yeah.
We want the same things. I think it's ridiculous that people with criminal records can't become a social worker. You know, I
Yeah.
think there are times you've got to be careful about who you keep in a social work profession, but it's not to do with whether or not you've got a criminal record per se. You can not have one and still be an awful social worker. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of other factors there. So I don't know. I think it's not an easy question. And how do you
No.
stay engaged? Well, we've just stayed engaged or connected through discussions, and sometimes we disagree. That's all right.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's what I'm getting at. I really value your ability to articulate your argument, and I suppose what for me it works well for me to stay engaged is to see the passion in somebody else. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
I really like somebody that will stand up for what they believe in, whether or not I agree for it or not. Like, but if you believe in what you're doing and the work you're doing, and you know, I can see value and merit in that work because you know, as I have said often, you know, one size fails all approach. Like if we take that sort of this is what
Yeah.
you get upset sort of scenario,
Yeah. Yeah.
so many people get missed and so many people get looked over and it doesn't work for everyone. So, you know, what works for me might not work for you and what works for you might not work for me. So the value is both of us having those ideas and concepts to articulate
Yeah.
and move and push forward. And I think for me, that's what I value in the work that you do.
Well, thanks, Dean. I appreciate that. And actually, as you were talking, I was just thinking that someone gave me a good sort of example to think about, which was, you know, if are we proud to be Australians? And if we are, then aren't we also ashamed that we're colonists if we're not an Aboriginal or a Torres Strait Islander,
Yeah,
and that we didn't, vote for the voice? Now, we as individuals might have voted or might have wanted something, but we're part of this bigger system in some way, or this bigger identity. And I think it's a bit the same. Like, yep, I work for these services and I see that they're problematic. I'm not saying at all that they're fantastic or perfect. I think there's pockets of good and there's pockets of good people, and there's also terrible, really bad and abusive things that happen. But I don't know if that would be different if I wasn't here,
yeah,
So I think, I don't know. And I guess that's the same with, we're all part of larger structures and systems, and we don't agree with all of those bits at all. And we try to change our bits where we can. And that's the only bit you can control, really, and be true to.
yeah. And having that, so the way that technology is at the moment and all that sort of stuff, I believe that we're trying to catch up and comprehend how we can use technology at the minute. And
Yep.
the world's sort of upside down because the kids are teaching the old people, whereas it used to flow down like that. So in normal times, the elders are the most respected and they held the information and they passed it down. Whereas now
Yeah.
it's upside down and the kids are teaching us how to use these technologies. So I've
It's
somewhat come
interesting.
up with there's an innovative evolution that's happening at the moment. And how can we use those in our knowledge to improve and consistently evolve and improve? Which I
Yeah.
think that's sort of what you were talking about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So just some light questions on a Friday afternoon.
Yeah. Why not? Well, you can't
Um,
talk about justice and have a light conversation, can you?
no, well, and there's a friend of mine that we always say, and like he's probably the most closest person I align with, and we always say, may we never agree. Because if we all agree, like nothing's going to change, is it?
No, definitely not. Definitely
Yeah,
not.
oh, this is good. Everything's happy. Blah, blah, blah. We don't need to do anything. It's
You
like,
don't
no.
learn anything.
Yeah. So we're always sort of chipping at each other and chipping away, going, I don't know if I agree with that. And I don't know if I agree with that. So, you know, in your work at the moment, what would you be, whether it's red tape or whatever, I'll leave it to you, but what's the greatest friction point that you think if that change would have the most benefit?
That is a really good question. I mean, there's a lot, but I think probably the politicization of this area of working.
Yeah.
Because I feel like particularly kids in youth justice, it becomes political football. And I wish we could disconnect it from that, that we could get an agreement in Australia on what we think the value should be.
Yeah.
Should we be human rights focused? Yeah, I think we should be.
Oh,
We should
100%.
be
Yeah.
right. And that, do we agree that kids are kids, they're not adults, and
Yeah.
that there is no such thing as a crime committed by a kid that
Kids
is
don't
somehow
need
an adult
punishment, they
offense?
need love.
Yeah. So, I mean, if a kid commits a horrific crime, it's still a kid did it.
Well, and the thing is, we have somewhat as a society created that as a systemic structure, you know what I mean? If a child's thinking that stabbing someone's an okay idea, like how have we allowed that? My opinion on that
Yes.
is like, what is my part in that, and how have I played a role? Like, I might not know the person, but am I letting my kids watch social media? What am I doing that
Yeah.
perpetuate and becomes a social norm, if you will?
Yes, exactly. And I think there's, that being able to disconnect that would mean we might actually make some progress in doing this better as a community and as a society, and particularly the way we treat our kids. I think, because I feel, I mean, I'm no longer working in youth justice directly, but I still feel really passionately, because I think it starts there. And if you can't even treat kids humanely and well in Australia, then what hope have we got of doing that along the line with adults, who we see as more culpable or responsible or whatever it might be. But it's just such a mess. It's such a hot mess what's happening in child protection and youth justice spaces, and that goes right back to what are we doing in schools and what are we doing for
Yeah,
families?
yeah, as a
What
whole
are we doing for
approach.
housing? Yeah, it's really fundamentally a welfare issue. And then of course you've got occasionally one or two kids where there's some other issues going on. It might be a neurodevelopment
Yeah, well,
issue or some other things, but they're such a small percentage of the kids in youth justice systems. And I wish we
yeah.
could eradicate the rest of it. So in that sense, I'm an abolitionist too. I think if you did it well, you wouldn't need it at all. You wouldn't
Yeah,
need
well,
this.
essentially, from my understanding, it's about 1,000 per capita per night, the juvenile population, prison population.
Could
That,
be.
and I may be out on that, so correct me if I'm wrong, anybody out there. But then that translates into 40,000 adults.
Mm,
So
could be.
that's how it works, isn't it? Like it's a
I don't know. I don't know.
but
I'm
the
not a
kids,
stats person, but yeah.
my experience has been once someone gets caught in that justice cycle, it's very hard without appropriate, adequate resources, support systems, and structures to get out of it until you
Yeah.
essentially grow out of it at 40 odd, 35-ish, which sort of
You're definitely right that once you're in the system, it's really hard to get back out again. And the more you bring kids deeper and deeper into the system, the harder and harder it gets, and the more likely they are to be entrenched for sure. And the younger a kid is with their involvement, the more likely they are to continue and stay in the system. So there's so many good evidence-based arguments for why you should have early intervention and a whole different approach. Yeah. So I'd like to see that as well, but I think you need voices. I feel you need voices from the inside saying the same thing.
Yes, yeah. Well, it's a big business. Everyone sort of like I benefit from it too. I get paid from the work that I do. Like so, ultimately, lawyers, judges, they all get paid.
Yeah.
There's heavy investment in that sort of stuff. But I recently done a fellowship a year ago.
Yeah, yeah.
But sort of where I've landed with what I found is how can I introduce humane approaches into traumatic or trauma-inducing environments to increase instances of joy and hope? Because
Yes.
I don't think it gets spoken enough about, but hope for me, when I went to prison and what happened was I become hopeless. I had less than hope. I behaved very desperately. I didn't really care who I hurt, myself included. So once all hope is removed, like that's when we get those sorts of reactions from children and even, sort of the neuro stuff and all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
No, you're so right. I think that's right. And I think you actually see it in the workforce too. If people working here lose hope and don't really think
They
that
go in well-meaning, that's for sure.
change. Yeah. But I think, if we're working in the system and we don't think anything can change or people can't change, then I don't think we've got a business being here anymore, actually.
Yeah.
Then you've got to get out and have a break or whatever. But I think that is that you feel that, don't you, on both ways?
At times, yeah. It's like my head is just hurting from the wall that I hit. At times, yeah. But
no, I mean, if you're a person who's in prison at the time and the people around you who are working in the prison don't have
okay, I get what you mean.
yeah, that's what I mean. You feel that transference of those feelings. I think
totally.
they look at you, I think, differently. Then they look like you're not going to go anywhere. You're a no. And I think if you're looking at kids like that, they grow up feeling like they're going to
mirror neurons, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
And on that, mainly because our time is getting close to it. I told you to go quick.
Yeah. Oh gosh, it's gone fast. Yeah.
What do you do that brings you joy into your life that then allows you to carry that into these systems and environments that go, oh, look, she's coming today and she's looking fantastic and she's full of joy and hope. How do you fill your cup up? What brings you joy?
Well, eating. I like food and well, swimming. I swim outdoor swimming, and that is what gets me going. I don't know why. It's a weird thing that I like, but I do love that. I don't know. I think when you're outside and you're in open water swimming, it's just such a different environment to closed confined spaces, for one thing. And secondly, it's just it's natural, isn't it? It's just you're out there. small element of danger that I probably do like. I don't know.
Hey,
But
that's
yeah, I
okay.
don't know. What's that?
That's okay.
Yeah, I
Everyone's
suppose
got a
it
bit of
is,
that.
but I don't think I've ever said that out loud until just now.
No,
I think that's what it's a bit of a thrill, I suppose. Keeps a bit of an energy going, and then I feel rejuvenated when I do it. But I mean, that sounds really Pollyanna though, because I'm not always full of joy and pleasantries. I sometimes, just like everyone else, have a crappy time and
yeah,
feel
which is
and
fair
to
enough.
myself, am I doing the right thing? Should I be working in these fields? Like, you're one of these people that makes me think about that, Dean.
Yeah,
And that's what
thank
I
you.
value about you. Really, it
Thank you.
does.
No, I appreciate
Yeah.
that. And I
Yeah.
relate to the open. So what I get from the open, because I have done the open water swimming and sort of that sort of stuff. I get a sense of insignificance because I get to that point where I'm like,
Yeah.
we know
Actually,
everything,
that's
and this
true.
is how you should do it, and blah
Yes.
blah 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 blah. And I'm like, I'm not that important. I'm not that
Yes. Yes.
significant. So I
Yes.
get a sense of insignificance in those sorts of spaces at times, which helps me to sort of go, wait a minute,
Yeah.
there's value in other people and their opinions and what they do.
Totally right. Yeah, no, that's right. That's actually a much better way to put it. That is what it is.
No. Yeah, no, I just wanted to say really thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for your time. I really, really value you coming on and giving us some of your valuable time, because for me, that's the most valuable commodity we have. Is there anything, any work that you're doing or anything you want to spruik or say or do before we leave and finish up?
No, just thank you so much for inviting me and for these good questions. I always really like talking with you, Dean, and it's just thanks. That's great.
No, it's a pleasure. Thank you, Shelley, and I look forward to talking again soon.
Okay, take care. Bye.